rest of the molluscan groups. And I believe all these are classes of mollusks. Mollusca is a phylum. I'm going to point out the videos. Pardon me. And I think the videos are well worth looking at just because they're so cool. So I'll show you the good parts, but I'm not going to sit here and watch them all with you because I don't know. I'm going to get YouTube copyright claimed or something if I try to do that. So you're going to have to do that part on your own, but they're all listed on the Blackboard site. And so here we go. We're going to go through all of these. So on the gastropods, you're gonna watch these yourself. Have a look at this video. This is showing a garden snail, and this is showing its radula, and it's going to look very similar to the radula of the polyplecophoran, rather, that we saw before, the gumboot chitin. The snails that you see here and the snail factory, this is a thing called Crepidula fornicata, which, if you know what fornicate means, that's exactly why they're called that. These things are some of the weirdest gastropods out there, and I'll show you what they are, but you can actually see them in action, which is something else. Let's see. Then we got our deep sea snails here. That one is actually a platyhelminth. I need to pull that one off. And nudibranch diversity. That's just a beautiful video. Have a look at that. This is all these undersea snails, and you can see them, swimming around and see all the different appearances. They're just beautiful. They are the best looking creatures in the ocean, I think. We're also going to look at the bivalves. So the giant shipworm is a really short video, well worth looking at. It's this giant bivalve with a tiny thin valve on top and a giant long tube-shaped valve. So it kind of looks like a magnificently huge version of of one of the tusk shells, but scaphopods. But it's actually a bivalve. It actually has two shells, and it's not a hollow tube. It's closed off at the one end, and it's got another shell over the other end. So it's really cool. They're gonna slide it out onto a tray, and it's just, oh man, yeah. Let's see. So bivalves versus gastropods in the fight. Who will win? You got to watch the video to find out. Cockles are one of these critters that, one of these bivalves that you'll see, and they will actually sort of hop and swim. And I wonder if that's a cockle or if that's actually a scallop. It's a different kind of edible shell. I don't know. We'll have to watch the video and see. I'm going to watch the video after I record this. And lastly, we've got a clam, and it's going to do what clams do, which is burrow. So bivalves are filter feeders, and they are going to be sort of like scaphopods. They're going to have that water tube that runs all the way through, and they're just going to pull water through day and night as much as they can and filter out all the particles that they can from that, and that's how they're going to eat. And so this is why bivalves tend to concentrate toxins and poisons, and there are times of the year when you just cannot eat them in certain places. Like there are mussels all over the place in Alaska, but there are certain times of year where there are blooms of dinoflagellates, and they release so much poison that it will actually destroy your liver if you try to eat these things at the wrong time of year. Other times of the year, apparently they're okay, they're tasty, but you gotta know, just like the locals do. So that's our next section. Let's go look at them and let's see what we can glean from the slides, shall we? Okay, so this is what the outside, well, you know the outside of a snail. This is what the inside of a snail looks like. And if you can see that, it's actually kind of like a twisted up version of any of these other mollusks. It just happens to lead a spiral life, but it still has its feeding appendage that comes out at the bottom. And we call this a foot, but this is going to be equivalent to the tentacles in an octopus, for example, or that sort of area. I guess they're not directly equivalent. There are tentacles. These are going to be up on this part, which is kind of like the head. Yeah, we got ovaries down here at the back. So it's just like a twisted, thin version of what we saw in a polyplecophoran or monoplecophoran. And I see the yeah, the auto translate is doing a really bad job with those science words, but oh well. You can go back and look at them on the slide and it will tell you. So here are gastropods. Once again, you'll have your little head sticking out. This is a gastropod called a limpet, which actually does have a hole in the shell. And so it's going to pull in water up here at the head or on the sides of the head and use it to aerate its little gills, and then the water is going to flow out at the top. And so some gastropods do that. So here are some examples of gastropods, and they don't all look like gastropods. This is that Crepidula fornicata, a little nutball. We'll cover that, I think, on the next slide. But they're all things that are that you could consider to be snails. But a lot of the beach shells you'll see will either be gastropod shells if they're a little bit curled and snaily, or they will be bivalves if there are actually two shells there, something like a cockle or a scallop. You can see this is an abalone, and it's got the same deal going on. See, it's just a gastropod, that little curly shell, and little tentacles coming out the front. And this is going to pull water in underneath the shell and spit the used up water out through this line of holes right along there. And so that's what all those holes are for. They're a little water waste pathway. All right, so you're going to want to pause this and take a little while and just soak in the weirdness of this particular slide. So these guys, yeah, I'll wait. So pause it right here. Okay, and I'm assuming you've come back now, or else you just were like, whatever, I don't pause for anybody. Not even you, Dr. Newman. Maybe that's what you said. I don't know. Either way, look at how they do things. So they're going to start out, and when a new shell is born, all the new ones are going to be males. And they start life as a male, but then they subsequently change into females. And so they take their turn. And these guys form these breeding stacks, just like that. So one of these snails will have landed at the bottom, and it will be male at that time. But gradually it will change. And another snail will latch onto the top of it, and it'll be male for a while. But gradually it's going to have to take its turn as a female too. Because as we keep stacking up snails, these are all little males in waiting. And the male that's furthest down the stack is going to try to impregnate the females at the bottom of the stack and basically just imprison them there so that they cannot leave. Because remember, nature is terrible. Yeah, so, but at least I guess these guys are taking turns, yeah. And so the oldest female will be here that used to be a male like the longest ago. The young female that just turned female, so they're real sex change artists here. You're going to have your transitional individuals in the middle that are still in the process of becoming female. They're transitioning. And then on top, you'll have some males. You'll have older males at the bottom of the stack and young males just barely clipped onto the top. So there's a teeny weeny male just clipped onto the outside. Here's our older males. This one may be transitioning. And then these are probably the older females down at the bottom. And these things pile up. If you go to the beach in Maine, the one that I went to there, they did not have sand. All they had was just heaps and heaps of this particular shell. It's considered particularly invasive. All right. These are nudibranchs. Nudibranchs are also gastropods. So these are snails that do not have shells. But they will still have some of those other forms. And so without the shell there, you can actually see what's going on. And a lot of these have just magnificent structures on there. For example, look at the gill plume. Just a little patch of these feathery gills at the back. Normally that's going to be tucked in underneath the shell, but not with a nudibranch. There's nowhere to tuck things. And these are the ones that are in that video, and I would say just put this on and enjoy. Show somebody else in your house something interesting while you guys are stuck in there. Here is another gastropod. Again, doesn't really look like a snail. Yeah, I'll grant you that. And some of these actually absorb their shells. They'll have shells as a juvenile or a larva, and then they will just dissolve that shell and go shell-free the rest of their lives. And this one you can see right through, so you can see all of its little organs in there, which is pretty neat. So this one's going to modify that foot at the front, which is going to be, instead of the tentacles, and it's going to use it like two little flapping wings. And so it's going to flap through the water like a weird little clear butterfly. And they're pretty strange, and their penises are also very strange. Look at that thing dangling out there. Okay, here, however, are the bivalves. And so the bivalves are going to have muscles, and the most important muscles are going to be the ones that close that shell. So they can actually open fairly easily. They can just sort of scrunch their mantle against that. But they have two muscles that are dedicated to closing the shell quickly in times of danger. And so there'll be an anterior and a posterior adductor muscles. And the adductor muscles are going to pull the two shells together and snap this clam shut. Yeah. So there's one of the valves. The other valve will be underneath. And these guys have a siphon that pulls water in, and then a siphon that pulls water out again, and they're going to oxygenate the water, or rather their blood, just before they spit the water back out. And in the middle, instead of radula, they are going to filter out all the little particles of food that they've pulled in. So that's how most bivalves make a living and find food. This is what I was showing you before. Every single year, they put on, bivalves rather, put on a new layer. And so at the bottom of each of these layers is going to be that beta-chitin, and then the PIF80, and then the shomatrin. And then bam, we're going to do it again. We just grow a little bit more every year. There have been bivalves that have been pulled up from the bottom of the ocean, and these things were several hundred years old. They can really live a long time, and you get a record of climate. So it looks like sometime around the early 70s, late 60s, was a very warm period. You got the bands all spread out. And you got a cold period in here, and then you got another warm period, another cold period, just like that, extremely warm period right in here. And you could correlate this with temperature records from back then, but also from dead seashells. You can figure out what the climate was like in the past, and you can date these seashells exactly, just like you can date tree rings. As long as you get together a nice big collection of them, and figure out, when the big years are and how many stripes apart they are. Okay, so here's a look at the way they're going to oxygenate their blood. So they're going to have this in-current chamber, which is where the water flows in. Then they will have an ex-current chamber where the water is going to flow back out. And in between, they have these sort of feathery gill structures, which is basically where they're going to run the blood through. And this is kind of like what our lungs are doing. We're just creating a large space where there's lots of potential for gas exchange on there. And you can see that even the little hairs on this are also going to be folded, crenulated, just like that. So just absolutely maximizing the amount of surface area on this lung, because every little bit extra helps them to breathe, and so it's really worth it. And here are the two shells. The animal inside is usually bilaterally symmetric, but in this way, if you were to look at the shell, each shell is not symmetric, but the two shells together are going to be bilaterally symmetric. That's the axis of symmetry. Okay, giant shipworm, not to give it away. This is what the creature looks like. These guys have, they're about the size of a baseball bat. Isn't that crazy? Some of these things have shells, and so they'll have a giant shell around the outside and a little shell on the top. Some of them are apparently shellless. And look at this thing. So it's still got the siphons. It's got an in-current siphon and an ex-current siphon. So it breathes in water, breathes it back out. And so it's just a regular bivalve, even though it's a very weird-looking bivalve. And this is one that I believe they've dumped out from its tube, from its shells. But it does have two shells around the outside of it. So there we go. That was bivalves and gastropods.